So I'll hand over to our first story and give a big welcome to Hannah from Nudge Community Builders in Plymouth.
Hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Hannah from Nudge down in Plymouth, and yeah, it's a beautiful day down here today. Thanks so much for inviting me. We're massive fans of Homebaked, so yeah, the feeling is definitely mutual. So I'm going to just sort of talk through a little bit about how Nudge started, where we are, so you kind of get familiar with the street. So I've got some photos that I'll share, and then I've got a few sort of questions to answer that hopefully I'll make sure I kind of talk about all the things that would be useful for you. So I'll just share my screen and hopefully you can see this.
Yes.
Is that all working for everyone? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So this is Union Street, not how it looks every day. Union Street is a street that cuts through our neighbourhood of Stonehouse and leads to the city centre. It's a big A road and is really a kind of major barrier for our community. It literally cuts it down the middle. But it's a really interesting and kind of diverse street. So it was originally built to join 3 towns in Plymouth, which is why it's called Union Street, and it's full of a whole mix of different heritage buildings. It was the kind of nightlife party street for many, many years. So a lot of these buildings were changed into nightclubs. And then gradually over the last sort of 20 years, they've all closed down and are standing empty. And Wendy and I both joined our local community group because we were, well, we were a bit lonely really. We wanted to meet people in our local community and you know, just kind of get to know people in our neighbourhood. And what happened now, there was a lot of kind of top-down regeneration that had been happening. So there was neighbourhood renewal funding and things like that. All of that had finished. And we were kind of left as a group with, you know, no resource really. And we were kind of like, what do we do from here? And so we decided to take some bags of shopping out onto the street and basically have a bit of a discussion with people and eat together and just sort of have a chat. And that kind of led on to a small street party just behind Union Street on one of the residential streets. People just spilled out onto the street in a really different way. So we saw people from our community that wouldn't normally come to a meeting or to something in a community centre or anything like that. So it was really diverse and really rich in terms of the sort of the fun and the conversations that happened. And at the end of that street party, the police said, oh, if you keep going like this, next time you'll close Union Street. And sort of several things happened, but a year later, we did close Union Street. So technically, it's a really tricky thing to do, obviously closing a major A road in the city. And everyone just spilled out into that street as well. So it's structured in terms of risk assessments and stuff, our street party, but it kind of embraces all the local talent and the history of the street. So we've had sort of burlesque dancers and things like that that kind of reflect some of the activity that happened in some of the old theatres and cinemas and stuff along the street. And that was 12 years ago now. So we've done it every year since then. And every year people spilled out onto the street and were like, why are there all these empty buildings? So 25% of the street standing empty. And that's not okay. It adds to a lot of the kind of complex issues that we have in our community. So we see a lot of antisocial behaviour, a lot of drug-related crime and things like that happening on the street. And people, you know, don't feel safe there. and it kind of gives a sort of permission for some of that to happen, because all of the buildings are kind of closed up and run down. So over the years, people were like, why is no one doing anything about these buildings? And we were like, well, actually, why don't we do something about these empty buildings? So we started just getting to know why they were standing empty, what was holding them back. And we started to put graphics up on some of them, get to know some of the landowners and things like that. So really kind of understand what are the issues. And then one of the landowners that we worked with was on this site here, which is the Union Corner site, which had been standing empty for 25 years. It was an old record shop, and then to the left, where the garden is was a building that had burnt down, and it had these huge struts like holding up the side of the building and stuff, and it was in a real state. And we very naively crowdfunded £10,000 to bring it back into use, and that was the start of our journey, really. That was 5 or 6 years ago now. And so we wanted to create a space where our community could come and test ideas. So they were talking about how many services are in the area, and actually, you know, if you have gone to the food bank, that's not necessarily the same building that you want to go to if you're wanting to sort of start something or try something in your spare time and stuff like that. So it's really accessible. You can hire it from £5 an hour for a local person, or £10 an hour if you're from outside the area, and a whole host of things happen there. And so, yeah, that was probably about 5 or so years ago. But what we realised was that actually the main person that benefited from this, aside from all the lovely community staff, was the landowner. We now pay rent for Union Corner. So we negotiated 2 years free whilst we were renovating it. We now pay rent, but also he managed to rent loads of the other buildings that he owns locally to better tenants, because this had started to change and people were interested in locating in the area because of what was happening on this corner. And so that started us on our journey to think, wow, could we start taking ownership of some of the buildings? So we set up Nudge in 2017. Me and Wendy both quit our jobs, and we were just kind of, yeah, in quite a kind of crazy way, just went for it. We were like, let's just give this a go. And the first building that we bought was the Clipper. It was a 24-hour pub. It was standing empty. So this is only about sort of 5-minute walk from Union Corner, still on the same street. And we took all the lessons that we'd learnt from Union Corner and used them to bring the Clipper back to life. So that's got 2 flats above for single parents. So one of the things that we learnt from Union Corner was to listen all the time, and that it can be one thing that someone says that you can translate and do something about. And so we don't do a lot of formal consultation, but we're kind of all the time sort of soaking up what the issues are, what people are talking about, what they'd like to see, and seeing how that can play out in what we do. And the 2 flats is a really good example, where there was a group at Union Corner and some of the men were saying about how tricky it is because they get put in houses of multiple occupation, or accommodation where they can't have their children to stay, and how that affects their role as a dad and their role in the family. So both of the flats are for single parents who don't have their children living with them full time. So we looked at the legislation, and there's a minimum size for a 1-bedroom flat, but not a maximum. So there's kind of like, we've sort of designed them in different ways so that you can easily partition off or use rooms for someone to come and stay now and again. And then downstairs is the cafe. And it goes right back a long way. So there's kind of little market units through the back that you can wander through, and people can have a go at selling things and or doing kind of unusual things in those units. Then we took over the plot. So we took over the plot, which is kind of halfway between the Clipper and Union Corner. So all in a really tiny geographical area. This was sort of in the early days where we kind of moved on a lot now. So this was about working with a landowner in a different way. So we made an agreement to take on a development site alongside renting this out. So we're leasing this building, but with a reduction in rent to compensate us for the investment that we're making. And the plot is an alternative shopping arcade. So the other thing that we noticed on Union Street was that it doesn't have many roads kind of coming in from either side for our community. So with the Clipper, you can kind of walk all the way through the building, and in a similar way, you can do that in the plot. And so you can walk through and see, I think we're up to about 15 different enterprises in there now, all in sheds and greenhouses. So the idea is kind of around this sort of allotment theme, and people can sort of bring their ideas into life. And then just recently in September, we bought a huge cinema building called the Millennium. And we bought that 50-50 with a private investor. So through this journey, we've been really interested in kind of different ways of unlocking ownership. This building had been standing empty for at least 20 years. And so it was, and there'd been sort of several attempts to kind of bring it back into use. It was owned by an investor in Jersey who was really remote and all of that kind of thing. So we're now bringing this back into use as a 1,000 capacity venue with commercial uses and daytime uses around the edge. But it's not all about the big buildings. So one of the things that's really important for Nudge is the really small things. We do lots of little interventions along the street that start to add up to the big things. And so I've just put some examples here. This is one of the gap sites where we kind of gradually sort of add layers. And one of the things that we've learned is to start. So you can do something and then go back and revisit it. So this is an example where we had our sort of first commission up on this wall, and then we went back again and we've done something a bit more permanent. And then in the future, we're hoping to develop this site. So it's an example of kind of gradually building up ideas. This is our advent box where people can, each local person has a key and they can open the box each day during December and have a look at something special that's been made by a local person. So again, it's kind of those really small things just disrupt areas where people might not feel safe, and in a kind of really accessible way. And this is the same area where we kind of set up a swimming pool. So these kind of things are just as important as the ownership of our buildings. And now we're just kind of starting to link up with the university a little bit more around technology. So really thinking about how we bring new opportunities into the street, how we curate the uses in our buildings in a way that doesn't gentrify the area, but actually brings in uses that really contribute to our community and that they, you know, feel local. So I'll stop sharing so that we can chat a little bit. So there's just a few things that I kind of wanted to draw out. I was asked to sort of talk about the finances, and we've used a whole mixture of different finances. So with Union Corner, obviously we crowdfunded, and it's nearly stacking up in terms of paying the rent that we need to and our costs. In terms of the Clipper, we took on short-term loans. So we took on a 12-month loan, partly from the council and partly from private investors. And then we flushed all of that back with a community share offer. And so that meant that obviously it's like collectively owned. So we're a community benefit society. And that kind of cooperative and sort of shared model of ownership is absolutely at the heart of what we do. So that's the clipper, and then obviously now we're getting the rented income from the clipper. It doesn't fully cover what we need to do quite yet, but we're getting in a stronger place. So with the cafe, we started off by sharing the risk with the company that was coming in. So we both took a percentage. We took a percentage of their traded income, and that was about us both investing together in making that work. And now that it's more established, we've kind of stepped on to more of a sort of standard rental model, which gives us more security and stuff going forward. And then with the plot, it's mostly sublet. So all of the kind of, we've got sheds in there that people can rent from 130 a month. So there's a real variety of offer that's really accessible, and we are really careful about sort of holding that for local people and opportunities, but also seeing how people progress. So if they're like at our street market at Union Corner, or, you know, we've seen people that have come for soup at Union Corner, and then they go on to sell something at the Clipper. They go on to do some work for us. They might get an arts commission to do things on the street, and then looking at taking on one of the sheds. So that care for those connections and how people grow alongside us is really, really important. And then how we spend our money is also really important. So we spend 50% of our money within a mile and 95% in Plymouth. And so it's all about kind of reinvesting, and similarly who we employ and all of that kind of thing. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we do that on a very, very sort of local level. And then obviously we're scaling really rapidly now. So I just kind of wanted to talk about some of the challenges around scaling. One of the challenges is just keeping up, because things are just like opening up. But the other challenge is around gentrification. So obviously, sorry, as I said, like 25% of the land was standing empty. We've reduced that slightly. But actually those sites are the ones that stand to gain the most from what we're doing. And so we're starting to be really strategic in quite a sort of stealth-like way to see what we can do about that. So we're exploring models that are like a land bank. So how can we support these buildings to get into better use? Not necessarily for nudge, like we don't want the street to be like nudge land, but how do we unlock them so that other people can come forward, but in a way that really recognises what our community needs, rather than you know, sort of maximising how the value is extracted from those buildings. So that's something that we're starting to work on now as we scale. And then the other thing is how we look after our values as well. And that plays out in lots of different ways, like how we support our staff team to kind of really understand that, and how we make sure that we bring on sort of consultants and things like that. We've got a lot of pressure to start operating in the way it should be done, and that's not our way. So we're really thinking about how we articulate our values in a way that speaks to the development industry, for example, and some of the different consultants that we need to pull around us. So that's something that's kind of taking up a lot of mental space at the moment. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a quick kind of canter through what Nudge is up to. I'm really up for answering questions, and looking forward to hearing the rest of the day.
Thank you, Hannah. That was great. That was really great, really interesting. I'm going to bring Britt in. I can see we've had a flurry of questions and comments. So just some people are happy to ask and join us.
Yeah.
Britt?
Okay, so we have I'm going to start off with another Hannah, who also, Hannah, do you want to unmute yourself? You asked something about getting advice on the financial side of things. If not, I will ask it. Okay, so did you need or get any advice on the financial side of things? And Hannah says, my parish council is about to buy our local pub, which has been shut for 11 years. The prospect excites, but scares me at the same time. So this is a question about financial.
That's not Hannah, that's me, Viv Nelson.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
When I
That's
popped
okay.
it over. Sorry, love. I asked it for you now. I'm so sorry. Let's see what the answer is from Hannah.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of advice, we were a bit overwhelmed with advice in advance of taking on the clipper, which was, you know, sort of at that time a massive risk. And so it can get quite overwhelming, and we have found, like, the more advice that you ask, the more you get, and there's whole queues of people that are telling you, quite happy to tell you about all the risks and all the things that could go wrong and all the different ways that you could do it, but not necessarily people that go, oh, actually, but I would suggest you do it this way. So we're quite wary about how much advice you kind of want to be listening, but then it's like, how do you process that, and what's enough advice is quite a challenge to kind of figure out. But I guess our best advice has come from a mentor we had at British Land, who just shared that they do fag packet calculations of whether things work out before they go ahead with something, not, you know, massive viability reports and things like that, and all the things that we're kind of told to do. I mean, an element of that obviously is really important, and it's kind of like, but it is about how much do you need for you personally to feel comfortable about it. And one of the things that has always reassured us is just working out, if we, worst case scenario, like, stare it in the face, if we sold the building, would we be able to pay back our shareholders and move on? And generally that stacks up. So it's kind of like really looking at what the worst case scenario is in that sense, and then whether you can reconcile that yourself. And I think as communities, it's really important to sort of recognise that accountability, you know, at the school gates, in the pub, wherever. It's kind of like you've got to feel really comfy yourself about the financial risk. And as long as you can get to that place, then I think, you know, you can kind of manage the finances. The other thing that doesn't get taken into account enough, I don't think, in terms of viability appraisals and things like that, is like our amazing ability to pool resources locally in a community. So, you know, all the connections that we have led to people taking on tenancies in our buildings and things like that in a way that is completely different for a private developer. They don't have all of those connections, all those people around them that want to make it work, that want to spend their money in your buildings, and all of those sorts of things don't get factored into sort of the standard financial approaches. So it's making sure that you take time to kind of add that in as well and believe it's there. I think that's really important.
Thank you very much.
And Catherine, you asked 2 questions. Do you want to choose the one that you find more pressing for you at the moment?
I think it's what you were saying about empty land, empty buildings, but I was particularly interested where you said there was an absent landlord in Jersey, but your venue, but you've managed to progress with that. How did you do that? Was that through the council with the CPO, or did you track them down? You're in a partnership. What's the deal there?
Yeah, so we tracked them down. So what we've realised is that a lot of these buildings, you don't get kind of like a for sale sign on it, and you can't go through that sort of like standard process as you would if you were buying a house. It's much more relational. So a lot of the buildings have changed hands just between people that know each other, and kind of in really odd, quite dodgy ways. We've got quite a lot of dodgy landowners. And so with that one, there was on the land registry, it was down as a shell company, and there were multiple shell companies. And like, we're not an expert in this, so we had to learn all about shell companies and stuff. So there were multiple shell companies, but it actually ended up with this kind of multi-millionaire in Jersey. And so then kind of trying to get in touch with him, and we used lots of different ways to actually try and find a number for him and things like that. And then, you know, it took time. So all of these relationships, I kind of ring the landowners. I've got like a kind of list of them, ring them, check in with them, all of that sort of stuff. So kind of building up a bit of a relationship with them. With the guy in Jersey, he used us brutally. Do you know what I mean? He used us as a stalking horse. So there were other people that were interested in the building, took advantage of us. He kind of, for a while, he was like, oh, now I've got an architect and I'm going to knock it down and do this. So it wasn't a smooth journey towards acquiring it. So it takes a level of resilience and kind of recognizing how you can always like keep getting yourself into a stronger place. So through all those ups and downs over kind of a number of years, really, of us trying different routes through to that owner, we were like, what would help us to move as quickly as possible? So we had like pre-agreed loans sorted out. You know, we had a grant that was sort of like a accordion grant, so you can draw it down really quickly and use it for deposits and then flush it back and things like that. So we, alongside those kind of steady like check-ins with the owner, it was like, how do we get in a position where we can move fast? Because there's a window with some of these dodgy people where they might suddenly need a bit of money, and if you can move in that window. So when he finally agreed to sell it to us, he was like, but you have 3 weeks. And it's like, so they set like weird, it's all games and stuff, but it's kind of getting yourself in a position to do that. A year before, we lost out on a building just because someone else came along and said they were a cash buyer, but they then took 6 months to complete. So we've kind of got a bit more savvy about how you can be confident around that sort of stuff. But right up until the last day, that deal was on, off, you know, and then at the end, it was like literally every half hour it was on and off. So it takes like, yeah, kind of a lot of, a lot of energy to kind of push through that. But the ownership is just so important. The number of communities that have missed out, you know, invested loads locally and then actually missed out on the economic benefit of that. There's so many stories like that to share.
I'm really aware we have 2 more minutes, so I'm going to, there's 2 questions here and I'm going to ask both. Hannah, and maybe you can sort of answer them both. So Rosie, this is actually another question, I guess, that asks about gentrification in a slightly different way. So Rosie asks, you mentioned the area previously not being safe and there being a lot of drug abuse, etc. Have you thought about any initiatives to cater to this group, such as safe injection centres, things like that? Do you know if this demographic moved to other areas of Plymouth now having the same problems? So this is Rosie's question. And then Rebecca asked quite in general to just tell us, what other important lessons did you learn from Union Corner other than the always listening lesson? So if we maybe put those two.
Well, so for the first one, it's very much a live issue. So it's still the area with the highest crime rate in Devon and Cornwall. So that hasn't shifted. But what we are doing is kind of disrupting that. And our approach is that everyone's welcome. So it's about those opportunities to bump into each other and to kind of experience the richness of edges. So, you know, in our, not at the moment, obviously, but normally in our soup kitchen, you would have people that are on their, you know, work break from lunch alongside people that might be on the streets, people that are living on their own. So it's kind of like how, and what we found is by creating those environments, they self-manage in a different way than if you are offering a service for a specific group of people. That community is as welcome as others, but it is about kind of diversifying that and breaking down some of the barriers is kind of where we focus. When something really serious has happened, so there was an attack outside the hot dog place and someone had their ear cut off and stuff, and the lady that was running the business just felt really vulnerable. So then we kind of pop up with like deck chairs and pink carpets and, you know, a bit of music and stuff like that. So it's about visually kind of showing that people care for that space, also disrupt some of that, but it's very much like still a big issue along the street at the moment, and it's also because a lot of the services are based in and around that street. So we've got so there's a reason for people, and all the hostels kind of people have to be outside from 9 till 6 generally, and so they're spending a lot of time on the street and they're bored, and so then that leads to some of this behaviour. So we do stuff around that sort of thing, but we don't offer specific services ourselves. And then in terms of the lessons from Union Corners, there was a big one around red tape. So like the world and his wife rocked up to tell us about problems with asbestos, and like that we had to spend like thousands of pounds to take down the shop front and things like that. And so we had some really bleak times where we were like, we're going to have to like pay everyone back their crowdfunding money, and we're not going to do this. But the shop front was a really good example of actually getting to that really dark place and then finding a route out. So with that, we had it sort of structurally checked, and we kind of fenced it off on a Sunday, and actually we did a risk assessment and knocked it down in 45 minutes, and then it was gone and it wasn't a problem anymore. So it really gave us that sense of like, actually, like some of this you just have to reconcile the risk yourself, be careful, but then actually just do it, because there's always more people kind of queuing up to tell you problems and stuff. So I think that's something that's played out in all our buildings. People leaving their mark. So before we even had like the lights on properly and stuff like that, people had made lampshades and stuff like that in Union Corner. And that's about kind of getting that sense of ownership in a very subliminal way, but it just kind of gives the feel that this space is cared for in a different way. So how people leave their mark and contribute is something that we roll out now. And also how you bring people in really early. So looking back, like we had, rather than hazard tape, we had like some AstroTurf down and some bunting to guide people in safely across the sort of site that had been burnt down. And we were so proud at that time. We were like, oh, welcoming people in and stuff, but actually sharing that journey of like, this is the kind of wreck we've taken on, and now it's a bit better because we've got a working toilet, and now it's a bit better because we've got the lights on, and all of those sorts of things. Bring people with you in a way that sort of creates a real sense of like a large number of people being really invested and caring about a space. And so that process is something that we've continued as well.
Anna, thank you so much. That was really great, and thank you everyone who asked questions. That was a lot of inspiration to take from that. So thank you.